Good afternoon, everybody. I am Asaf Ramarowski. I am the Executive Director of SPME, and it is my pleasure to once again welcome you all to our SPME webinar series. This afternoon, we have the privilege and opportunity to hear from our friend and colleague, Cary Nelson. Cary is currently an emeritus professor, a Jubilee Professor of Liberal Arts at University of Champaign-Urbana. He is the author of 36 books. He's a prolific writer, researcher, and scholar, and been in the fight about academic freedom and anti-Semitism. He's also the former president of the AAUP and its chair of Alliance for Academic Freedom. And he's done a great deal of work on these topics. Of late, Cary's latest book is exactly entitled Hate Speech and Academic Freedom. Highly recommended to all to read. And really the subtitle is The Antisemitic Assault on Basic Principles of Hate Speech and Academic Freedom, and something that Cary will talk about of length today on this very topic. Format-wise, those of you who've been with us in the past know Cary will talk for about 35 to 40 minutes this afternoon, and then we'll go into a Q&A. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions, so we will do our best to respond in a timely fashion. If we do not get to your questions, obviously feel free to email us after the webinar, and we will respond after that as well. But really, without further ado, Cary, thank you for joining us, and the virtual floor is now yours.
So thank you very much, Asaf, and my thanks to you and to SPME for making this opportunity possible, and to those who are joining us today. I also want to thank SPME for its many years of well-informed updates on contemporary anti-Semitism and the BDS movement, which I think are really a great resource for so many of us. That's been not only a great resource, but an absolutely essential one since October 7, because we've been flooded with hundreds of reports and documents and news stories. And the SPME guides are really a way of handling material that's completely beyond us. I think it's certainly beyond me without that SPME help. So a special thanks to them. And if you haven't been using those resources, you certainly should. So the book I'm talking about today, Hate Speech and Academic Freedom, was completed in July 2023, just a few months before that radical fissure in our understanding of the world opened up, the fissure on October 7. The time differences between Israel and the US, 7 hours in the East, 10 hours in the West, meant that we woke to early news reports of what had been going on for hours in the kibbutzim, the towns, the roads, and in the fields along the border with Gaza. The slaughter of families that was so terrible, it seems it should have woken us in the middle of the night. Of course, for most of us did not. As soon as we woke to hear the news. All of us knew that, even then, that despite the indescribable horror, a substantial part of the international community within days would find reason to blame Israel for everything. We knew that in part because we knew Israel would rapidly have to launch a military response to the Hamas assault. And the unsettling, unfamiliar reality was that the response would have to begin on Israel's own territory. For the Hamas murder squads were still at woke when we arose that morning. What we did not expect, or at least I didn't, was that a fresh wave of anti-Semitism, now thoroughly fused with anti-Zionism, would sweep over us not within days, but within hours. In an uncanny echo of Israel's intelligence failures about Hamas's capacities and planning, those of us outside the immediate zone of combat had our own failure of imagination and understanding. We had not understood the depth and spread of anti-Semitism in our own midst. In colleges across the country, hatred amongst our anti-Zionist faculty, colleagues, and students was brewing in wait for this passionate release. There is no other explanation for the rapidity with which eliminationist hostility coalesced on the left. It filled the anti-Zionist soundscape and surrounded us before it had a chance to develop. In retrospect, it would seem as if we woke to the first and second waves of horror simultaneously. The horror at what Hamas was doing, and the horror at its ecstatic endorsement by Hamas's allies. There was barely time to grieve or process the Hamas pogrom before the campus wars were underway. And yet at that point, we could not glimpse the possibility of Hamas solidarity encampments spreading across the US and into Britain and Europe. When we imagine scenarios for the rest of 2024, we're only guessing in the dark. We actually do not know what awaits us around the next corner. And yet expect everyone in this audience knows we cannot await events passively, that we must marshal resources and initiate actions now. And yet, a generation ago, I remarked that the defining feature of faculty identity that had dominated the academy for decades, arrogance, the hallmark of the faculty, had increasingly been replaced by fear. Fear was now in faculty bones. In the wake of everything that has happened since 10/7, there is unquestionably new realization that wishful thinking and denial are neither winning nor even tolerable strategies. Campus anti-Semitism cannot be allowed to fester as we train the next generation of leaders and professionals. Yet, along with belatedly awakened courage, there is intensified fear. Fear of reprisals for openly expressed Zionism, fear of isolation, and overt ostracization for those unwilling to condemn Israel. The fear bubbles up in students, staff, and faculty. It is something each of us must confront and face individually, though we can help by creating group solidarity to combat it. When I was completing this book, I had doubts about whether even sympathetic readers would consider, let alone endorse, some of the strategies I propose for countering faculty anti-Semitic anti-Zionism. Perhaps the dramatically escalated threats we've faced since 10/7 will persuade some people to consider adopting positions they would have rejected less than a year ago. So let me encapsulate some of the issues and options covered in my new book. I'll number them in sequence. First, defining academic freedom. At the core of the book and of any strategy responding to faculty anti-Semitism must be a restoration of the founding definition of academic freedom. We don't need a new definition. We need to discredit the false understandings that have gained power and influence over the last 2 generations. Conservative critics of the academy have long complained that faculty champion the rights and protections academic freedom grants them while ignoring the responsibility it assigns. While that's true, it sidesteps the definition of academic freedom the AAUP articulated in its founding declaration of 1915. There, it's clear that academic freedom was created as a social good to protect the collective search for the truth. Individual faculty are protected so that their teaching and research can contribute to that larger purpose. Unconventional and dissenting views are protected because they may be recognized as persuasive in time. The search for the truth requires us to condemn falsehood and correct error, including anti-Zionist error. Academic freedom does not spread a protective blanket over misguided assertions and conclusions. It requires debate and dispute as part of the search for the truth. The increasingly common nonsense from the anti-Zionist camp maintains that it suppresses their academic freedom anytime their opponents fault their history and their contemporary political beliefs. And we're going to see more of that. But such debate is one of the responsibilities that academic freedom encompasses, and we have to reimagine and rediscover that truth. One principle I support throughout the book is that academic freedom protects your right to say what you want, but it does not protect you from professional consequences for doing so. You have the right to propose funded research, proving that Blacks are inferior or that Jews conspire to control the world's economy. But your colleagues have the responsibility to decide those are patently false hypotheses and deny your request for support. Some claims do not contribute to the search for the truth. It can take decades for that conviction to reach full multidisciplinary consensus, but at some point it did, although rogue disciplines can be outliers. Second, and this is one of our worst problems, the subject is disciplinary truths. Our reliance on academic disciplines as arbiters of what counts as true must no longer be doctrinal. As recently as Finken and Post's 2009 book For the Common Good, a book by two highly respected long-term members of the AUP's Committee A on Academic Freedom and Tenure, followed by Post's 2012 book, The Disciplinary Commitment to Advance, quote, the Sum of Human Knowledge, seemed unshakable. Finken and Post grounded their confidence in what they believed was, quote, a commitment to the virtues of reason, fairness, and accuracy. Such values formed, quote, the framework of accepted professional norms that distinguishes research that contributes to knowledge from research that does not. They quote fellow Committee A member Joan Scott's unwarranted confidence that disciplinary communities protect a place for criticism and critical transformation at the very heart of the conception of a discipline. And former Committee A member, Berkeley historian David Hollinger's idealized assurance that, quote, any particular disciplinary community exists within what we might see as a series of concentric circles of accountability. I mean, these comments seem like Saturday Night Live humor at the present time. Finken and Post trace this understanding back to John Dewey's observation that indoctrination consists in dogmatically promulgating as truth ideas or opinions that a discipline does not regard as dogmatically true. They phrase their admonition accordingly. Faculty should not impose a truth of a matter as to which there is a dispute within the discipline. A standard that no longer deals with the absence of dispute that surrounds the dubious truths some disciplines now promote. Hollinger argues that we should judge a department's reliability in terms of the fidelity of the department to the broad contours of the learned discipline it is charged with representing on a given campus. That's not much help with Mideast studies, with women's studies, with anthropology, with African American studies, the list goes on. Finken and Post give a concluding admonition. Academic freedom obliges scholars to use disciplinary standards, not political standards, to guide their teaching. Yet they give no serious consideration to those disciplines whose standards have themselves become increasingly political. We now have a series of disciplines that consider the claim that Zionism is racism to be an established truth. At least since 10/7, if not earlier, they claim Israel is carrying out genocide in Gaza. What disciplines are thus almost entirely immune to reason, oblivious to evidence where Israel is concerned? Well, I've listed them. They have become indoctrination machines. The dissident faculty members within their ranks, if any survive, need an Endangered Species Act to protect them. What I propose in the book at some length is that the departments representing these disciplines need to have their independent rights to hire and grant tenure and admit graduate students taken away from them. That will require faculty senate involvement and long-term multidisciplinary oversight. It's going to be immensely difficult. But keep in mind that many in STEM fields already view these programs and on their own campuses with complete contempt. They don't see them as serious academic enterprises. It's time that we act collectively and responsibly on that knowledge. Third, I discuss personnel decisions. There are a few key moments in careers when the beliefs and values faculty members espouse, the cultural and political convictions that guide their teaching and research, their exercise of academic freedom, can and should have consequences. If a faculty member can't tell the difference between evidence and opinion, if he or she cannot provide evidence to support their claims, if he or she is unwilling to discuss the published views of those with differing conclusions, they can and should face consequences. Put bluntly, you don't have to hire a racist or an anti-Semite. You do not have to grant one tenure. You do not have to renew such a person's contingent contract. That doesn't mean that anti-Zionists should never be tenured. Reasoned, evidence-based original work should be supported. But garbage should not be enshrined just because it stinks of anti-Semitism. I wouldn't enjoy it, but I would grant Judith Butler tenure. I would tenure Rashid Khalidi at Columbia. But I opposed tenuring Stephen Salaita here at Illinois. And there are others I would oppose as well. So the fourth topic is social media. The emerging consensus led by the AAUP puts faculty comments on the internet and faculty posts on social media platforms outside the reach of any and all professional evaluation. That means any such statements on social media are to be considered extramural, unconnected to teaching, research, or university service. The AAUP wants to prohibit consideration of their content or impact at any point in a faculty member's career. That's really the most recent radical effort to conceive of academic freedom as a faculty right, unencumbered by any social or professional responsibilities. There had been a strain of opinion among AAUP leaders that considered statements commenting on a faculty member's areas of expertise to be intramural, not extramural, that is, within the corpus of professional views and responsibilities. The most prominent spokespersons for that position, again, were Matt Finken and Robert Post, both former members of the AAUP's primary policymaking body. I served with both of them. I cite their co-authored book above. But in 2015, the AAUP took the opposite stand. All social media posts are to be considered exclusively public domain statements. It's taken quite a while for the academic community to absorb this news, as it was first contained only in an AAUP report on a tenure case. But in the last few years, it's been included in procedures for hiring and tenure committees. That means when you hire a faculty member who is active in extremist groups on social media, but never takes quite so extreme positions in academic journals or in class, you are supposed to ignore the social media activity. If a faculty member builds a public reputation for his or her racist or anti-Semitic social media activity, the AAUP says it must be considered protected activity within the university. The faculty member will be held harmless when considered for a job, when being considered for tenure and promotion, or when being renewed for a term contract. This means that a faculty member who moderates his or her opinions in academic essays and on campus, but offers them in what amounts to a spectrum of continuous racist or anti-Semitic views online, can only be evaluated in terms of the officially permissible texts. The wholly unacceptable antisocial character of the candidate's views may only be clear when all the evidence is considered, but according to the AAUP, a responsible committee cannot consider all the evidence. It must ignore everything supposedly extramural. As I argue in the book, a faculty member could create an alternative social media persona expressing views that contradict a universal academic consensus, indeed a truth accepted by most of the world. The campus can have a lunatic on board, but consider him beyond reproach if he limits lunacy to his iPhone. A faculty Holocaust denier who limits his denial to Facebook is therefore protected, even if he is a European historian for whom Holocaust denial would ordinarily make him unfit for a job in a history department. Instead of protecting academic freedom, the AAUP's policy position will inevitably discredit it. I mean, I think the policy is insane. Imagine what any normal person outside the faculty administration bubble would think if you told them, as far as we're concerned, the virulently racist faculty member Joe Smith on Facebook and Telegram, who says Black people are inferior, should be considered an entirely different person from the Joe Smith at our university. Now, of course, they both happen to have the same home address and the same Social Security number, and they look the same in photographs, but we're treating them as two people so that we can preserve academic freedom. This will not be tolerated by the public. It cannot be sustained in common sense. So I think we need to this madness in a forthright manner. And we have to reject the AAUP's position. I know of search committees at various campuses that have been told you can't consider social media when you evaluate a candidate. And yet you're supposed to be deciding whether a candidate will make a useful member of your community. You're supposed to be deciding not only whether his or her teaching research looks good, but whether their public presence on campus is going to facilitate dialogue, understanding, and advance the pursuit of the truth. Not too long ago, an essay appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Education supporting the AAUP's position that said, a faculty member who engages in white supremacist ravings on social media is protected from professional consequences. So that's the way we're going, and we shouldn't. The fifth example, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism is one of the book's core subjects. I include a chapter that defines IRA's important educational uses on campus and addresses all the significant arguments IRA opponents have advanced. Yet another chapter documents the elaborate debate about IRA that took place at the University College London campus. So far as I know, that's the most extensive IRA debate that has taken place in higher education. I worked with faculty members there for information and insights. Elsewhere in the book, I document a number of the research projects that now use the 11 IRA examples to help determine the anti-Semitic character of statements on social media. So IRA, as the research methods make clear, the IRA examples are a starting point for identification, discussion, and classification. They're not an automatic anti-Semitism detector. They can't work that way. On campus, the 11 IRA examples give coherence and intelligibility to what students and faculty otherwise find a chaotic field of anti-Semitic statements and accusations. The 11 examples give essential structure to a notoriously mutating phenomenon and offer a starting point for rational discussion over the status of individual statements and actions. In other words, the IRA examples, far from incriminating statements, they give you a basis to classify them and to begin talking about their status. So having thought through all the objections to IRA, and I try in the book to respond to every significant objection that I have found, I also drafted a policy statement that campus administrations or faculty senates could use when they adopt IRA. In other words, they would announce that we're adopting the IRA definition, but we're setting these parameters on how it can and cannot be used. It's not that I think these reflect real risks, but they do answer the fears and the arguments people have raised, which is why I think this policy statement would be helpful. It's in the introduction to the book, but I'll read it to you now. The university formally adopts the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism as its official guide to identifying, analyzing, and combating examples of anti-Semitic speech and action. In doing so, we endorse the definition's important qualifications that full understanding of potentially anti-Semitic statements requires an account of the context in which they were made. That will often require knowledge of the long history of what has been called the longest hatreds, its strategies, metaphors, consequences, and contemporary manifestations. We also join with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance in specifying that the definition is non-legally binding. Thus, it will not be used on campus as a quasi-legal invitation to disciplinary proceedings against students, staff, or faculty. But we believe its 11 examples provide an extremely helpful guide to the major forms of contemporary anti-Semitism, and thus offer substantial assistance in understanding their increasing presence both here and abroad. The goal of the working definition is not to shut down conversations, but rather to illuminate them with understanding. The definition cannot be used to prevent anti-Semitic speech from occurring, but it can be used to help reach consensus about which statements merit condemnation. That will help alert us to the broader patterns of anti-Semitic speech that require a coordinated response. That's the end of the policy document that I print in the introduction to the book. And obviously, different schools, if they were to do something like this, they can modify it. They inevitably will as faculty members contribute. But it suggests that you can adopt the working definition in ways that eliminate the supposed threats of its misuse that have circulated. I also point out in the book, and this is important, that IRA was adopted by the Alliance in 2016, and from 2016 to 17, there were several examples of administrators who used it improperly. But far from recurring, those misuses seem to have convinced people you don't go there, you don't do that. Now, IRA critics continually cite the examples of the 2016 to 17 errors, and I describe them in the book and say, look, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen everywhere. They just have a little trouble coming up with examples since 2017 because I think people learned their lesson. So that's also partly what I'm addressing in this policy statement, and which I discuss a lot more thoroughly in the book. So in general, let me say that I continue to support a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I've published repeatedly, and I keep revising it, a list of 50 conditions that should be met and procedures that should be followed in establishing a Palestinian state. I believe there'd be more support for a Palestinian state among Palestinians if it actually seemed a realistic political option rather than a fantasy. Why tell a researcher that you support a Palestinian state if you're in Ramallah, if it seems like a Palestinian state is less likely than another trip to the moon? If the realities change, if the prospects become real, I think you'll see a change of opinion. Similarly, if a full set of security guarantees were clarified and well established in Israel, we would eventually see more support. Assuming Hamas were eliminated as a political and military force and Gaza were thoroughly demilitarized. There's a lot of faculty observation, not in 2023 and 2024, but earlier than that, that Hamas could become a true partner for peace, a rational enterprise. I never accepted it. I always considered it absurd, but it's now become almost impossible, but not completely so. Those who recommend a one-state solution also often believe in the utopian idea that Hamas, the lion, will lay down with the lamb and become an advocate for peace. This is nonsense. But in any case, I'll say to conclude that if a better future can be provided for Gaza, then in 5 or 10 years, the current war could be seen as a painful but necessary phenomenon. After all, horrific though the bombing of Dresden may have been, and fundamentally, viscerally appalling as the use of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki proved to be, those are now democracies. They're allies. And the war, at least, is now universally seen as necessary. However horrible it indeed was. And the war in Gaza, which is so widely condemned on the left now, could be viewed differently if the people in Gaza were given a different political future. I don't think they get that future so long as Hamas is around. Whether anti-Zionism could ever be eliminated is another matter. Certainly, I see no prospect of anti-Semitism fully disappearing from the world. So thanks a lot. I look forward to a conversation.
Great. Cary, thank you for that thorough and really detailed analysis. There's obviously a lot to talk about, and there are many questions coming in. I'm going to let Alex ask the first question, and then we'll go to the audience, and then we'll take it from there. Alex?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks very much for a very provocative presentation. Lots of things to talk about, and I have many notes. But I'll sort of skip to the crux of the matter, and that is to ask.
I'm not sure I know what the crux of the matter is.
I don't.
I'm
going to make it up. So, I mean, what you're proposing assumes a lot of good faith on the part of at least enough people within this institution that we call higher education, who could bring about the restoration of dispassionate capabilities and aspirations on the part of the faculty. And it assumes that administrations are somehow powerful enough or have enough will to do things like put departments into receivership and to intervene directly and forcefully on promotion and tenure and on obviously faculty searches and so on. You know, really going back to the tradition, you might say, of that existed from Alexander von Humboldt through Robert Hutchins, a sort of autocratic, top-down, muscular administrative conception that keeps the faculty in line. I don't want to put it, well, that's the way to put it. Who makes this happen? And does academic freedom apply to theological seminaries?
Well, you may indeed have identified the crux of the matter. So I'll begin by saying that. It's not that I'm looking for unilateral administrative authority and courage. I'm really looking to the faculty senates and faculty committees on academic freedom and other faculty bodies to show the intelligence and the background to do these things. Do I have faith that they will? Certainly not. I just don't see any other option, and I'm not yet willing to say that the university as we know it is hopeless, that it has to be abandoned, and we all have to go to the newly founded University of Austin as though it were an island in the sea and try to redeem matters there. So I'm still looking for, and part of what I'm looking for is engagement in the university based on what they actually think about the university from STEM fields and other fields that are not yet contaminated by anti-Zionism.
But don't we have evidence of how some substantial majority of faculty members feel, in the sense of the outrage that's been expressed in the aftermath of breaking up encampments and building takeovers, and in the slew of votes of no confidence in university presidents, which are largely meaningless, but it's a kind of show of hands. And why would we think that that the bullies wouldn't double down?
Well, they will, obviously. They already are. It's just a question of whether we can mount a countervailing force. I will say that, you know, I've helped co-found this new University of Illinois group, Faculty in Favor of Academic Freedom and Against Anti-Semitism. And we do have scattered faculty members here and there in the humanities, but basically our strengths are in the sciences, the professional schools, some of the social sciences. I mean, most faculty members in the humanities won't even answer my emails about this group, let alone say that they will or will not join. They just pretend the communications don't exist. So, you know, I think one of the things the encampments have made clear, and the responses of the encampments, is that, and a friend of mine argues this in a piece, that the two cultures splits that C.P. Snow identified are becoming really more an evident reality on campus. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? I mean, there are a lot of people in STEM fields who don't regard the English department or the women's studies program as serious enterprises anymore. I mean, they think they're an embarrassing joke. They just haven't done anything about it. They've chosen to stay in their bubble and not get involved. So the question is, can they be activated? Can they take responsibility for the institutions of which they're a part? If they can't, then it's not clear what the solution would be, because intelligent interventions from outside academia, well-informed interventions, are few and far between, and not much of a sign of hope either. I mean, you could conclude, as some people on the right have, that the university's phenomenon is is dead as a viable intellectual enterprise. I'm just not willing to go there, in part because there are so many thousands of faculty members doing good work throughout the academy, throughout the world. I'm not willing to throw them out with the work that is so ideologically compromised. But, you know, all I can say is there's work to be done. Do I have confidence that it can be done? No.
I have
Well,
many more comments and questions, but maybe we should look at
yeah, let's go to
something
the,
from the audience.
we'll come back. All right, Cary, let me try to go through some of these questions, from our audience. So our Rachel Peck is asking, your comment about your distinction when it comes to permitting tenure when it comes to Butler versus Rashid Khalidi, but not Stephen Salata. How do those academics and their works differ, and how do you make that distinction?
Well, first of all, I often have similar objections to their conclusions. The question is, do they follow proper professional procedures in reaching their conclusions? That is, do they provide evidence to support what they say? Are they willing to engage in some kind of dialogue with people who operate from different positions and conclusions? Are they really part of academic debate? Can they make basic distinctions between what is their opinion and what should count as evidence? Do they have standards for considering what evidence is? So, I mean, Khalidi in some ways seems to have gotten progressively worse in the things he's willing to say about Zionism. And indeed, that's one of the things that happened after 10/7. I think which is the significant number of faculty members escalated their anti-Zionism and more frequently expressed some forms of anti-Semitism. But still there are, I think, reasonable and objective standards for finding work that you really disagree with vehemently tolerable within an academic context. Those judgments aren't automatic, they're not easy, but I think you can make them.
Great. So the follow-up,
I would add Joseph Massad at Columbia to the people I would not tenure. I mean, he's got a long history. Sometimes it seems dating back to before he was born for rabid anti-Zionism. He's another example of someone that I couldn't grant tenure to.
So let me ask a follow-up, Cary, and everything that you're saying, with all the evidence that we've seen since 10/7, what about, in tandem, the actual support for terrorism and Hamas? Where does that fit into the constellation, when it comes to exactly this very point, when it comes, people like Rickford and, what we saw now with, Abdu at Columbia and others? I mean, where does that fit into your larger view here?
Yeah, well, I do talk about that in the book, in part because a lot of what perhaps should count as support for terrorism occurs on social media in one form or another, or they're public statements made at demonstrations and on other occasions. And I consider that part of a faculty member's professional file. I consider that part of the work. But I think another issue that excuse me. We need to think about differently in light of the spread of social media and its influence. That is, we tend to judge potential support for terrorism or say support for Hamas as it's voiced in a US context. But everything on social media goes everywhere in the world. Maybe it goes to other planets as well, as far as we know, but it's just not you can't judge what support for terrorism amounts to if you're just judging the probabilities of violence within an American context, real as those might be. I mean, there are places in the world, including Israel, where terrorists do a lot of actual harm to other human beings. And what you say, what a faculty member says and does needs to be evaluated in terms of its potential international impact. That makes a big difference.
Let me jump in real quick. I would strongly disagree with you here, because I think, for one thing, faculty members have leapt to the defense of their students, particularly in the wake of the encampments, who do call for terrorism and violence and anti-Semitic discrimination. But more fundamentally, the pervasive decolonial ideology that has saturated so much of the humanities in particular, and restructured scholarship across the board throughout the social sciences, casting every historical circumstance in terms of the settler colonialists versus the indigenous population, and advocating for whatever means necessary to expunge these stains, explicitly moral but also implicitly violent kinds of solutions, in addition to the explicit statements on the part of faculty members like, yeah, what do you expect is going to happen? This is what decolonization means. You can't undo the house that, with the master's tools, or however that goes. So I think that terrorism, faculty members, as you know, are fundamentally passive aggressive. They don't like to get their hands dirty. They like to stand back and machinate and pontificate and make everything go the way they would like to. And I think it's always been that way. And this is another kind of antinomian moment where students are literally advocating, in many cases, for the university to burn down. So was written on the wall of the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, and faculty members are defending this. So how do we square the circle here?
Well, I do talk in the book about other things that we can do to try to make faculty speech more responsible, or try to discourage irresponsible faculty speech. And I say, for example, that someone who behaves that way at a demonstration, so a faculty member who's willing to call for the institution to be burned down, might not get a salary raise. I might not get a salary raise for multiple years ongoing. He or she might find they can't get their sabbatical applications approved, their requests for travel money approved. I mean, if you really have, I'm talking especially about, a faculty member with tenure, since the key points of hiring and tenure decisions, they pass, and someone can turn into an idiot, even if a useful idiot, after tenure. And so there are a whole range of non-catastrophic sanctions that can be applied to try to convince people that their contributions to the campus are counterproductive. At some point, you do tolerate faculty opinion and faculty actions that you find loathsome. I mean, tenured faculty opinion. And what you do is condemn them and argue against them and plan pedagogical initiatives that counter them. And you have only those sort of affirmative options to counter it. That's part of what preserving academic freedom is going to entail. It's going to entail, aggressive efforts to counter faculty speech. that you really consider to be destructive. And there may be nothing beyond that that you can do.
Alex, I'm gonna go to another
Yeah,
question.
yeah, please.
Okay,
I'm,
cool.
I'm pondering my response.
No worries. I'm gonna allow our friend Cole Bunsell to ask his question. So let me unmute Cole for 1 second. Cole, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, ask your question.
Right. Hi, Cary. Thanks for your excellent talk and book. I had a question about what you said about these the departments like Middle East Studies, Women's Studies, et cetera, that have become what I think you've called ideological factories. It seemed to me they're really much more acting like wacky think tanks than, university departments. I suppose the question is, how do who's responsible for drawing that distinction, and what is the responsibility of, say, the board of trustees at one of these universities to put it in, say, a receivership or really try to make fundamental change? And that leads me to the issue of Rashid Khalidi that you brought up before. It seems to me, I kind of agree with you in the sense that, he's done a lot of important historical work, certainly an earlier part of his career. But how do you, if you tenure someone like him, then you get Joseph Massad, and then you get a Mohammed Abdu. It just seems like an escalatory ladder is inevitable. And then, sorry to ask more than one question, but you mentioned the need for something like an Endangered Species Act for people who traditionally would have been part of these departments but are no longer welcome. I'm curious what you actually envision in terms of that. I mean, what do you think of what's going on at the, say, University of Florida with the Hamilton Center?
Thanks, Cole.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that you need to do in thinking about the intellectual status and caliber of a department, at least in these cases of ideological distortion and indoctrination, is think broadly about the state of the discipline. Because most departments that go this route are also embodying disciplinary convictions. So if you think about the state of the discipline, you have a much broader field of reference. You have many more publications and public statements to look at. And you can also do it in a kind of depersonalized way. If you think about your department on your campus, it's pretty hard not to think about the people who are in the department first and front and center, right? And so it becomes a problematically ad hominem debate. But if you think about the state of the discipline, then I think you can reach fairly objective standards. So if women's studies, which my wife taught in for a number of years, and I published in and went to conferences for quite some time, at least in the 1970s. Then you look at the National Women's Studies Association, which in 2015 adopted the most radically anti-Zionist statement of any disciplinary association to that date. Then you're looking at a discipline that has in significant ways become corrupted. And that alerts you, I think, to concern about the local department, which may or may not perfectly replicate the distortions of the discipline. But you can ask yourself whether it does or doesn't, and start there as a judgment about what the state of the discipline is. In terms of oversight, of course, we have oversight mechanisms. We just don't take them too seriously. I mean, the university has conducts reviews of new faculty appointments. It just usually mostly accepts the word of the local department. But I think where you have a problematic discipline, you cannot assume from the get-go that the department's local recommendation is reliable. The problems with the discipline alert you, I think, to the necessity for additional review of departmental decisions in town. And I think, I've served on this campus, I've served on the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Executive Committee that reviews tenure decisions and promotion decisions and faculty appointments. I've served on the campus committee that does the thing. And just a second. I'm getting the dog taken out so that you don't hear additional contributions to my presentation. So there are mechanisms of review, and on my own campus, I've seen those committees take very serious responsibility for occasionally reviewing an appointment, a tenure case, a promotion, an application. It's not a matter of course, but they have shown the capacity to do it. And so it's partly just a question of getting that capacity increased, of getting the willingness to do that increased, and of getting disciplines that don't ordinarily involve themselves in extradisciplinary matters more willing to take on the issues. So the chemists that I know and the physicists that I know are not going to be eager to have to ask themselves on a regular basis, are these recommendations coming from a humanities department reliable or not? They're going to have to involve themselves in the intellectual life of the university as a whole more than they have done before, if my suggestions are to work. But the structural opportunities are there. Those at least do not have to be invented. And that's why I have some faith that they could be intensified if people want to do so. But it will be a real sea change for them to do that. Obviously, in terms of the Salida case, the Board of Trustees and the campus administration finally intervened. I took the position that they made the right decision, but for the wrong reasons, or at least for inadequate reasons, because no one anywhere on campus did a complete review of his scholarship, his publications. They didn't in the department, the administration didn't, obviously the Board of Trustees didn't. And so if you want to evaluate someone's potential or someone's status in terms of their ideological component, you really need to do a thorough review of everything the person has published and everything they've said. It's a lot of work. You really need to go into a case thoroughly. And then perhaps you decide, at least if you're looking at Khalidi's history of the PLO, this is generally responsible work. What you were doing if you were looking at only what he said in the last year and cut off what he'd said before then, I think you'd have a different kind of position. So that's the first part of an answer to that question. I'll say, what did I not respond to that you were asking? Why don't you retrace that a little bit?
I think we have to it's the receivership.
Receivership. Yeah, my favorite example of receivership occurred at Harvard about 30 years ago, when Harvard put its English department into receivership. The administration decided that, and it took them a long time to decide that this was happening, that the English department was consistently hiring new faculty of a dramatically lower grade and accomplishment than the existing faculty. That is, they decided the English department was hiring down, not on the basis of politics or ideology, but on the basis of quality. And they eventually decided that the senior faculty in English preferred to hire marginal or semi-competent assistant professors because those new faculty would provide no challenges to who directed dissertations, who taught courses. They were hiring less good people, even inadequate people, out of the most degraded self-interest. So they put the department into receivership for a number of years, and they appointed an outside committee to do hiring rather than have their own department doing it. So I figure if Harvard can look askance at one of its own programs, the University of Illinois can do so, and other institutions can do so. The capacity is there. And there are all different kinds of receivership. I mean, you can replace hiring and tenure committees with a collective group. You can, if absolutely necessary, basically mothball a department until the current members die out. I mean, you can reach a conclusion that that department cannot renew itself in a viable way. It cannot renew itself in a responsible way. And so it does no hiring for a period of time. That's obviously much more radical than having an interdisciplinary committee on campus or multi-campus do the hiring for you. But that's the extreme option. So receivership, I think, varies in terms of its severity and in terms of its specifics. But I go back to what I said before. If there is considerable opinion and conviction on the part of existing departments that a particular department is no longer an academic enterprise, that it's an embarrassment to the institution, and that's the situation that I believe now exists, you really can't continue ignoring the problem.
Thank you for that. I do love the imagery of the mothball, concept. I think that we all like that. And the problem is, of course, that people are not retiring or dying quick enough, depending on what we want to go with the reality. Let me ask. Let me try. I know we have.
Well, I'm not recommending that something be done about mortality, but
yes, no, I know. Let me try to combine two more questions, and I'll go back to Alex. Apropos, your comments before, the question of dealing with the university and convincing the boards of trustees. Jessica is asking, how do you convince university leaders that anti-Zionism is indeed anti-Semitic, especially, I would argue, post 10/7? And I would also add and try to combine, another point that was raised here, within that evidence collections process, how is this also related to filing Title VI matters? Are they going in tandem, or is there a better way to hold the accountability of the institution, especially as it relates if you're filing Title VI matters? Is that another avenue positively that you're seeing that could be used as kind of another measure?
Well, to take the last point first, the Title VI complaints that have been filed to date, including those by the Louis Brandeis Center, have been, I think, immensely informative. I mean, they are politically educational documents if they're thorough. By the way, the Brandeis Center filed one against my own campus several years ago, a pretty good document with lots of researched examples of anti-Semitism. There are, of course, several documents that have just come out in the last month from Harvard University that are very persuasive indictments of anti-Semitism on campus. So both the Title VI complaints and, in some cases, other really detailed reports on the status of anti-Semitism on campus are hugely valuable in terms of alerting people both inside the institution and outside the institution of what the problems are. Now, my university responded to the Title VI complaint by writing a pretty good letter of commitment to prioritizing the issue of anti-Semitism and of taking real actions to combat it. And they've had, 3 years to respond. They've had 3 years to put those promises in that letter into practice. What have they done? Well, pardon my language, not a damn thing. They've issued a great letter, and they've actually taken no bloody actions in furtherance of their promises. So that's the problem with the Title VI complaints. That is, how to actually get the institution to act on them. I think they're great documents to educate people. I'm not convinced yet that we have proven that they can produce real change, but they're, I think, a good step in that direction. But they require continued monitoring, continued action, We are certainly very disappointed on this campus, increasingly so after 10/7, at the failure to respond substantively rather than just verbally to the Title VI complaints. So I think we should proceed with them, but they will not suffice as a mechanism. Another thing that I would like to see happen is from alumni, specifically from donors. Looking back over the last 30 years, we now have, painfully, a number of donation by Zionist Jews toward Jewish studies programs, and that money is now being used to support anti-Zionism. There are Jewish studies programs, including my own, that have substantially turned anti-Zionist. Not wholly, but the leadership of the program is largely anti-Zionist. So we need to find a way to get donor agreements which constrain major donations from political abuse. I still do not believe donors should have the right to choose which faculty members hold an appointment or to approve faculty appointments, but we need legal guarantees against political abuse of of major donations. So, and I've heard rumors that people were going to work on that. I haven't seen the actual proposals for donor agreements, but that's something else which has to be built into efforts to resist anti-Semitism on campus. So donors have to be able to speak significantly about how their money is used. And until that happens, they shouldn't donate. They should withhold donations. Well, that's another element, however messy, that I think has to be brought into place much more significantly.
Great. Alex, I know this, for sake of time, I'm going to let you have the last question.
Okay.
I know there's a lot more to talk about, but I'm just I know that we're all on a timetable, and Cary, you may have to come back and talk more about all of this, but
Sure.
we hope you do.
Anytime. I've been known to give 3 to 4 hour Q&A. So
Yeah.
if you're willing,
I'll get coffee and come back.
We'll get a lot of coffee. It's all good. Let's go ahead.
Well, just very quickly, with respect to your comment about donors, I always tend to paraphrase Bill Clinton that, if you drag a $20 bill across the quad, you'll make a friend for life. But that's not my question. I want to situate all of this within the overall crisis of the humanities. And students, as we know, have voted with their feet. And the number of English majors, the number of anthropology majors is minute. These fields have collapsed. And at the same time that they've collapsed demographically, they have become more extreme politically, ideologically. I would point also to the institutionalization and professionalization of both ideology and mediocrity through DEI bureaucrats, who are the political commissars of the modern university. And while you were speaking, actually, I noticed that Harvard has announced to some fanfare that it is eliminating its DEI statements from prospective faculty members. So they are responding in some nominal fashion, at least, to this. But I would argue that the espousal of all manner of ideologies that 5 or 10, much less 20 years ago, transgender ideology, indigenous knowledge as an ideology, reparations, decarceration, restorative justice, intersectionality writ large, these are appeals by disciplines that are collapsing, whether they're K through 12 education or universities, but specifically university disciplines and departments. But it leads to the question that now that universities are facing a donor crisis on the one hand, but also a demographic cliff, that within the next 5 years, the number of students is going to start declining. American students is going to start declining rapidly. What what should the 21st century American university look like in the 2030s and the 2040s? How big? How many departments? How many disciplines? Your institution is a public institution which has tens of thousands of students. Is that going to be sustainable? And is it going to be possible to shape things? I don't want to use a surgical metaphor too much, but in such a way that some kind of integrity and comity are restored.
Well, you're certainly correct, and I suspect everyone on the call would agree that the decline of student enrollment in the humanities has been matched by increasing politicization of humanities disciplines. Whether there's a causal relationship, as some would like to claim, I'm not yet convinced, because I think often we don't know why students vote with their feet in leaving fields. The humanities took a serious dive in the mid-1970s. We didn't know why. We didn't know why enrollment declined. Enrollment eventually came back, and we didn't know why it came back. We puzzled over it, but we had no good explanation. So other than the job market and things like that. So I'm not sure that there's a causal relationship between those two things, but they have happened in tandem. And the fact that they've happened in tandem dramatically increases the problem, okay? And I'm sure some students do vote with their feet because of politicization. I remain absolutely naively convinced, and will do so until the day I die, that the close reading skills that are taught in English departments and that I devoted myself to for nearly 40 years of teaching remain extremely valuable across the whole range of academic enterprises. It's those close reading skills that I have used in analyzing the writings of anti-Zionist faculty. I was close reading poems, and I'm now close reading Jasper Puar. But it's the same skills. And so I think, I've given some evidence that kind of attention to rhetorical and argumentative detail, which happens in not just English, but in history and some other humanities fields, is really a huge intellectual resource across the human science as a whole. And so I like to think it's recoverable. And I know that there are faculty members all over the country who are still teaching those skills, as opposed to teaching the skill of chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's a skill as well, but a lesser one, I think, than the close reading skills that are central to a number of humanities disciplines. So, is there a reason to have faith that the skills will survive in their institutionalization? I don't know. If the demographic changes that you're pointing to prove true, and if we don't compensate with foreign students, then some state systems may decline. There are a number of states where there are one or more central public universities, and then more regional ones. The regional ones have always been vulnerable. At the central ones, when your enrollment declines, you tend to draw enrollment from people who could get into the others before, but can't get into the highest caliber one. So certain institutions will be protected from that very process. The more regional state institutions will suffer, and the major flagship institutions will not suffer the same results of demographic decline. What should the university of the future look like? I mean, I don't have an answer to that question. I trouble myself with the question of whether the system we've set up can survive or not. So I have lots of anxieties about it. But other than the kind of solutions I've proposed today, I don't have good answers beyond that. And I don't know what the future will bring. But I'm not at ease about that future, that's for certain.
Right. Well, unfortunately, that's a good place to end, and obviously it leaves us more room to unpack and talk a lot more of this stuff as things are evolving daily, as all of us know. But Cary, really, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us. I think that there's, you've done a great job and a lot of research and with these very delicate and very complicated issues that are facing and are, as you put it, are concerning all of us about the future of the university. And I would also say, as the future of Western society, as all these are kind of indicators of where we are and what we're looking at these days as far as these institutions. So hopefully you can come back and we'll do more. We'll continue the conversation. Alex,
both you and Alex, and it's great fun to talk with you.
It's always a good time.
Indeed.
So I want to thank Alex again for as always for joining me, and of course I want to thank everybody who joined us this afternoon. Thank you for taking the time. Be on the lookout for future webinars, and everybody will stay safe, and we'll talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care.